So welcome along to this, the fourth session in this series of learning events around participatory grantmaking. This session is around systematic change and how we do that through participatory grantmaking. Because we are looking at building a movement around participatory grantmaking and hopefully rejigging and rechanging the way that philanthropy is done across the globe. We are really interested in people tweeting, so if you are on Twitter and you're that way inclined, please do feel free to tweet. The hashtags that we are using are participatory grantmaking and shift the power. I this morning have managed to tweet shift the power without the F in the shift, so you can join my merry band of people that have made that mistake. I'm surprised it's taken this long, if I'm honest. I've been tweeting on shift the power for quite some time, so that's been my morning. Thankfully somebody pointed it out fairly rapidly. If you caps locks the first letter of all the words in a hashtag, so shift the power, if you caps lock the S, the T and the power, one, that makes it just much easier for people to understand what the hashtag is, but it also makes it really easy for screen readers to pick up as words rather than gobbledygook, so please do caps lock those. My Twitter is @Patterson Hannah with one T. Feel free to follow that, and I blog regularly on Medium around participatory grantmaking if you are interested. So this series of learning events is around my Churchill Fellowship. So a year ago I was really lucky to receive a fellowship to explore participatory grantmaking. I got to travel to South Africa to spend time with the other foundation, and there's some photos here of kind of me enjoying that, and also to the US to meet other people doing best practice across the US. And in the US I did a bit of a road trip, met with lots of different people rather than spending time with one organisation intensively. And the learning sessions that you're this is one of them that you're at and that are kind of been over the last few weeks is predominantly to launch the report that came out of that fellowship. I have tried to write the report so that it isn't a huge block of text that you have to get through. Each chapter is kind of an exploration into a specific issue, so you can dip in and out of the bits that you find useful and helpful. On the back of that, we've developed a community of practice around participatory grantmaking. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff and want to know more about it on a long-term basis, then please do let me know. The community has quite an active Slack group, a mailing list, and we meet once a month to think and talk about participatory grantmaking. We've got 3 sessions that we rotate. So in February, the session is around peer support. So it'll be small groups of people coming together to discuss an issue, unpick a problem, that kind of small group work that you can meet other people, make friends, and grapple with the issues you've got. We then do deep dive sessions. So the March session is around the difference between participatory budgeting and participatory grantmaking, what similarities and what differences that we're finding. And then we do an advocacy session. So how do we share this practice across philanthropy more widely? So if you are interested in joining the community of practice, please do drop me a line and we can add you in. There are only 2 sessions left in the learning series after this. So if you're interested in this work and you want to come along to any of the others, we've got the future of participatory grantmaking on the 27th, which will involve some small, short, sharp presentations from people about what they imagine the future to be. So it'll be around storytelling. I think we've got some poetry in there, some art. So it'll be a quite interesting and very different Zoom session to your usual kind of talking heads. And then the last session on the 28th is around operationalizing participatory grantmaking, which is a horrible word to spell. I think I might have made it up, but I'm just going to go with it. But a great session to kind of think through the kind of staff budgets, resourcing that you might need to engage this kind of approach in your work. So without further ado, we are joined by 2 incredible speakers today that I was so lucky to have met and hung out with while I was in South Africa with the other foundation. So we're joined with Thandeka and Samuel, who will be chatting us through the work that the Other Foundation do, but particularly looking at how the way that they fund really embeds kind of systematic change across their work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you two to give a bit of an overview of kind of the Other Foundation and what you do and how systematic change is embedded in that work. We'll hear from them and then we can go to questions from you lot. So I don't know who would like to kick us off.
I'm good to kick us off.
Go on then.
Because I'll introduce what Thandeka will talk about as well. Thank you so much, Hannah. Hello, everybody. There's so many people, but it's nice to see some faces and lots of names. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but I think the best way to describe our participatory grant making, which Thandeka will do in a lot more sort of detail, is to give you a bit of context of why we chose to do participatory grant making, what our thinking was behind it. So 6 years ago now, we started the Other Foundation with the idea that the LGBTI community in Southern Africa was always going to be a permanent minority. That was a fact we had to sort of grapple with and come to terms with. But more than that, a model of change in our movement we had inherited from the past. So unlike change, the grassroots change that had helped various movements in Southern Africa before, which is organizing from the bottom, figuring out what the problem is and connecting with other people who share the problem, advocating for change, and seeing finally laws and attitudes busy changing. So that sort of framework didn't exist in the LGBTI community. In our movement, what was happening was we were having northern pressure essentially put down on our leaders, so on our governments, on different NGOs, on different institutions that said, we're going to pressurize you with aid, we're going to pressurize you with various things to make these changes. And we see that kind of disparity in South Africa a little bit, where although we have constitutional changes, we have legal changes, the felt experience on the ground hasn't changed very much at all. If to some degree could have even got worse, all arguable. But so that context is where we really came in. And the idea of trying to shift the way our activism was being done to get that attitudinal change as well as the legal change in other Southern African countries was to put power back into a process. And I'll discuss the process. Put power back into a process that allowed money to be spent where change was actually affecting communities. So HIV/AIDS funding, for example, flooded Southern Africa for the LGBTI community. So a lot of proposals, a lot of things even we received were around HIV funding, even though our call wasn't for it. But as each call has come out, we've seen a sort of shift away from that kind of funding into far more advocacy, far more attitudinal change, working with religion, working with business, working with media, far more like straight to the point kind of stuff. And what activists actually wanted to do. So what the Other Foundation wanted to do was empower that. And what we decided was that our grant making, our participatory grant making, wasn't going to be in a bubble. It was part of the sort of much bigger picture of convenings, community engagements, research that was done. So not research from the outside, but research from actual LGBTI people living here who can talk to parents, who can talk to religious leaders, and who can really understand the dynamics that we're facing so that the campaigns are directed, the campaigns are meaningful, the campaigns that come out of it can actually influence change. So that's sort of the broader context that we find ourselves in. I'm going to hand over to Thandeka to get sort of more involved in the grant making and the participatory grant making stuff. But then I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. That seems like the best way to do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel.
Hey, thanks, Samuel. Hi, my name is Thandeka. I'm with the Other Foundation. Firstly, congratulations, Hannah. This is amazing. When I met you, I was still new in my role and loving it. And now I have a different position in the Other Foundation, which gives me more hands-on with the grant making process that we're doing. So maybe just to start off with our grant making process, I will make it more current as we just closed a grant making process, a call for our grants last Friday. Apologies for the dogs. So what happens with the Other Foundation, the last year in December, we put out a call to give out 9 million rands, right? So in this call, we were asking people to align with our strategies. That's our work with traditional leaders, our work with families, our work with church women, our work within the advocacy and the movement itself. And in this process, we get all the concept notes that we receive, and it's such an overwhelming process because we received 319 applications, which is a great success for us. And having done that, we then put all these concept notes together and batch them according to our thematic areas of work. In that same time when we were doing this, we also put out a call for peer reviewers who are willing to anyone. It's open to anyone who is interested in the work we're doing, and including the community, to come up and be peer reviewers and help us with the selection of concept notes. This year, because of COVID, we are not able to bring these peer reviewers as we normally do to Johannesburg for a workshop for 3 days. So we are being faced with, how best do we do this in the times of COVID? So we'll be having ours via Zoom and putting all the peer reviewers in groups and discussing the concept notes. It's something very different, but as Other Foundation, we always respect the people and their time when they come to do these things for us. So we have to consider, we're taking people away from their families. Do people even have internet to log in and to make the decisions that we want them to do? That's very important for us. And so it's something that we are all like struggling with. Do people have comfortable places? Do we have to book people into hotels so that they've got access to internet? And in Southern Africa, we've been having problems with power cuts, the electricity being cut off, like load shedding. So it's all those things that we are being forced to readjust at this point. So when the peer reviewers come together, hopefully this will be on the 8th and the 9th of February this year, they'll be in a position to decide which concept notes will be taken further to our board managers, our board of trustees, to decide which one we'll be able to give. The peer reviewers would discuss. It's a very intense moment because people are very passionate about projects. Some people don't feel so passionate about other projects. It's a very intense conversation, and it's a very nice time. And maybe for all those who have read the report, I joined the Other Foundation initially as a peer reviewer too. So yes, when this happened, then they decide on which concept notes that we should take to our board of trustees. And then from there, we then contact those concept note organizations that applied and individuals. And we ask them to provide us with a full proposal with the help of our program officers in our team. And from there, then there's a contracting and yeah. So it pretty involves pretty much everyone. And I think personally, being in this position to make decisions and to see how other people, pockets of people make decisions on how we distribute the little money that we have, the little baskets of money that we have, it's very powerful. And for me as a person, I've certainly grown a lot. And I don't think my perspective of thinking would be the same had I not been a peer reviewer. So yeah.
You've got a really interesting story, Thandeka, from so you were an organization who came along. So the Other Foundation have a Kapano, which is a gathering to discuss important issues, which I was really lucky enough to go and visit while I was in South Africa. And those spaces was absolutely mind-blowing. It was incredible to kind of experience so many people from different places coming together. So within that, you had 250 odd attendees who were peer reviewers, they were applicants, they were potential grant holders, they were trustees, they were people that had nothing to do with the other foundation, on top of kind of panelists who were experts in the field. And that space was incredible because it enabled people to really kind of like learn and explore what was happening. And I suppose like that was your first experience of the other foundation, wasn't it? Was attending one of those?
Yes, so back then in 2015, after having applied to be a peer reviewer and really enjoyed the other foundation so much, they offered us an opportunity to apply to be volunteers for the Kopano 2015. And it was really quite a big thing for me because I had never seen so many queer bodies in one space. I come from Zimbabwe, and at that time I was based in Zimbabwe, where the conditions and the levels of self-expressions don't exist. And if they do, people still hide. And so it was such a crazy moment and just a mind-shocking moment to realize how big of the community is and that I just wasn't alone. But mind you, I'd already done the peer review process and I was quite aware of the organizations and the individuals that were there. So it was easier to dialogue and like, oh yeah, I've read about that project, how's it going? And from there, it just created a deeper passion for the work that I do now.
I mean, I found it the most incredible moving space. It was really phenomenal. And I suppose one of the conversations, Samuel, we had when we were there was around, because I was really interested in this whole kind of, if you're using participatory grantmaking to create systematic change, then like who decides what that systematic change should be? And Samuel, you talk through how you decide what's kind of like on the agenda with the Kopano and the kind of like pre-work that goes into it, and then how it's structured. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's how we can sort of get away with having, when we call out, having our themes and having what we want to say, is that those are evolving. They come from Kopanos, they come from mini Kopanos. So even the agenda for this large Kopano that's being talked about, lead organizations in the region come together beforehand to sort of shape what that agenda is going to look like. And so these constant meetings, as well as sort of thematic convening. So we have religious spaces, because when you bring different groups together all the time, there's very often very little movement happens. So we bring thematic areas together around religion so people can talk that language. We bring them around business so people can talk that language. And all those convenings sort of work to shape what our core looks like. It also shapes what our thematic areas look like. So that's all the way down to the organization's sort of our job roles are shaped by that. And so we have these portfolios that are shaped by the Kopanos, that are shaped by the calls, shaped by the research that's being done, and then the reviews. So it's this sort of living, morphing sort of way of working that allows us to respond to what we believe is, and what we think is quite successful now, actual change on the ground, attitudinal change, legal change. And it's because we have this, we don't see grant making as one thing. We see grant making as part of our research, part of our activism, part of our advocacy, part of our meetings. And that's how we sort of try our best to do participatory grant making in an effective way. And it works with our strategy. It doesn't work with everyone's strategy, but it's allowed us to really, and you can tell by the concept notes we received compared to the first concept notes in 2014 to now, you can see this complete shift towards wanting to make systemic change, wanting to advocate, wanting to build institutional like force, and not so much focusing on even understanding what the issues are. There's this sort of move forward to, we know what the issues are, let's do something about it. And so there's this obvious shift we can tell just from our concept notes, but the activists who are involved in the peer reviews, which is lots now, it's a vast group of people, are also involved in that. They also see that. They see that analysis. They see that regional movement. And to us, that's the cornerstone sort of how we can be confident in the money that we give, even if it's risky. We have that confidence that we know at least it's been endorsed by people who have done it, people who have been there, people who know what it takes to make change happen.
I found it fascinating in the Okupano, the kind of like the way that it was structured wasn't it like it's not a conference, it is a gathering of people, and the challenge that went kind of like from people on conference floor to kind of like panelists to volunteers, like it felt much more like a moving conversation rather than just we're going to kind of like lecture to you about what we could think. And actually those conversations meant that as people were kind of thinking about ideas or solutions or ways forward, there was always kind of, yeah, but what about this, or that doesn't take into consideration these types of people, or you haven't explored X, Y, and Z. And that was an incredible kind of like almost like moving shift in the way that the work was developed, that was really, really incredible to watch. And I suppose like from the stuff that you've funded, you've talked about you've mentioned the like legislative challenges that have come out of the work and actually moving away from that service delivery that you'll often see in that space. I wonder if either of you could talk about some of the things that have happened because of the grants that you funded or the research that you funded. Do you know which one of you wants to take that?
I think this one was allocated to me in our discussion. Sorry. Yes, hello. So there's sort of two ways to look at it. There's the obvious sort of changes in Botswana to legal changes, the challenges that are happening in the region. Things are shifting a lot. More than half the region has already shifted, and we want to sort of jump on that tidal wave of regional shifts. The Botswana case particularly sort of spoke even about the regional influences that are allowing for these legal shifts to take place. Then there's attitudinal shifts are much harder to understand. We are doing the first nationally representative surveys to sort of get our baselines. But what we're finding is vastly different information to what lack of a better word, Northern or Western researchers have found. And it's allowing us to shift our narrative quite a bit. So these research papers, these sort of documents have allowed us to understand things like same-sex marriage, maybe not the best thing to fund. It'll happen organically in some places. Some places it'll happen because there's large campaigns for it. But in general, those campaigns are less bang for buck, for lack of a better word, or don't hit the community as much as a campaign for gender recognition. And understanding why that is, understanding what's influencing people's attitudes in that regard. In Malawi, we found that intersex people, for instance, were 70 to 80% of people considered intersex people to be part of the community, needing of services, needing of human rights, and that allows the intersex community and the intersex movement to shift their analysis. So those are some of the successes we get from the different kind of research we're doing. Same to be in the religious community. So we have this group of parents of LGBTI people, and they've been organizing for years, and they have different groups in different places of parents who have gone through this journey with their children, good, bad journeys, and now want to advocate going forward. And what they've done is they've advocated in church spaces. So and I don't mean to offend anyone, I'm sorry if I do, in fancy church spaces, where everyone makes big decisions about what's on the agenda and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Those mothers brought LGBTI issues to the forefront, and they forced the churches to make decisions. They forced the churches to come to some conclusions. Some churches went good, some churches went bad. We have activists who have used themselves, their own stories, to try and shift church policies and church attitudes. So those are the sort of obvious, like, big changes, and that we can't say we were involved in, but that have happened while we've been funding and while we've been around, but had happened before. And so I don't claim any responsibility for any of these things. The more sort of nuanced changes that we tend to celebrate a little bit more are a small community popping up, and like a rural community with a relatively large size, but a person saying, no, listen, look what everyone is doing. I've looked at the other foundation's Facebook page and I've seen what these other organizations are doing. Let's hold a meeting. Let's meet in the library and discuss what we should do. Let's all the tools you can think of, activist tools you can think of, but not necessarily even asking for money. Just sort of seeing and connecting with the rest of the region and seeing that coming together, organizing, I keep using it for the last 10 years, the word, organizing, can actually improve the lives of the people around them. And so those are, and even to like funding models of other organizations that sort of fund globally, when they take our policies, when they take our grant calls, when they start adapting their grant calls to match what we're saying, and therefore tap into this huge, the convenings, the research, the grant call, and the grant making, we've now influenced these groups to make better decisions. So those are the more nuanced sort of changes that have come about because of the way we do things, because of our sort of commitment to participation at all costs. It's allowed us to have that influence in certain spaces that we're very proud of and we want to keep doing and lean into, because it's those emerging groups that are going to be the ones who change attitudes, are going to be the ones who have the hard conversations, are going to be the ones doing the difficult work. And the more of them there are, funding, no funding, and funding can be discussed and how we do it, but the ones not asking for funding, the ones asking for little bits of funding, there's a movement there that needs to be tapped into, that we're very proud of being a part of. Sorry, I ramble. I apologize.
No, it's good. It's good. It's not rambling. It's all gold. And I think this really struck me with all of the kind of stuff that I was doing around participatory grant making, is actually what part of it do you evaluate? Because there's so much good stuff that happens at the whole. Like if you look at participatory grant making as a process and as a kind of an ethos, rather than this is the decision making, you can look at the grants and what they achieve and how they achieve them. You can look at kind of like the impact of peer reviewers. And I think the systematic change that happens for participatory grant making isn't just the kind of like end results of the grant makers enabling kind of legislative changes in Botswana. It's around actually there's that change, and that's amazing, and that is systematic. But there's also this bit in the middle where you end up with people doing the peer reviewing space, where actually what they're able to do is completely like either change what they are planning because they've had this kind of challenge and input and can see the bigger picture, and they can see what kind of funders are asking for, or it can enable them to sustain their organization. So while I was in with the other foundation, I talked to an organization called Parents of Families of South African Queers, and Lawazi from that organization was telling me that actually, since being a peer reviewer, their ability to bring in funding and support the work that they did, and then the knock-on impact of them being able to sustain themselves, that funding didn't necessarily come from the other foundation, but it made that organization so much stronger and so much more sustainable because they were able to bring in more funding from different places, because being a peer reviewer had enabled them to make stronger grants, to see what funders were looking for, why they asked certain questions. And I find that stuff really, really fascinating. I think, Thandeka, you've had kind of quite similar experiences with kind of with the organization that you were with beforehand and your journey through the process.
Yeah, I think I just want to add on to like our type of representative participation model. Like both of you mentioned the Kopano, and just to highlight that the Kopano, everyone at the Kopano is doing something. It's either you're a facilitator or you're a volunteer, or you're on the panel or something. And that level of engagement actually helps people to be more aware of our strategy and where we want to go as a region, as a movement in the region. And speaking to what you're saying about how different lives are changed after the peer review system, like I would say it speaks more to our lived us grooming lived experienced leaders, in the sense that we now have myself, somebody who came from no background of what grant making is, but just wanted and was running a little project in Zimbabwe, an arts project on queer rights. And to be able to come into the process and decide to quit all of that because I wanted to be part of something bigger. And you could see where the movement is heading, and you all wanted to be part of it. So it's amazing. Right now, our team in the Other Foundation, there's 4 people who only initially their first interaction with the Other Foundation was them being peer reviewers, and they're now part of the team. And in-house, we're busy training strong facilitators for our grant making process. We're busy producing strong facilitators as we do our peer review. Everyone gets exposure to facilitate and to run with it within our team. So by so doing, there's a lot of empowerment that's happening within this process. And we have volunteers who, started off as Kopano volunteers, and now they applied to be facilitators. It shows the engagement and people wanting to be part of the bigger picture, and changing.
It's interesting. One of the questions that we had in some of the previous sessions is around kind of like, how does this work as a leadership like development stuff? And actually, I think one of the questions that most foundations are or should be asking each other, maybe they're not, is that like our funding staff ultimately basically look predominantly like me, white, middle class, predominantly women, and actually using participatory approaches can help completely change the skill set of people that are coming into those job sets, because actually you can train up, see what a funder, what being involved in funding is like, and then move into foundations. If you're in the UK and you're a funder, there's an amazing program called the 2027 Project, which looks at getting more working class people into funding roles that involves kind of year-long associate positions within foundations. So if you're interested in kind of that area, then do look them up. They're very, very good. But I was particularly taken by that in the Other Foundation, because your staff team are kind of from all over, loads of different identities, and some of them, quite a few of them, have come up through kind of the process in itself, which I found really fascinating and really exciting. I'm gonna, unless there's anything that I've forgotten to talk about that was on our list, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you've got anything that you would like to ask, thank you, Eli, sharing the 2027 stuff in the link in the chat. Any questions that you would like to ask, either pop them in the chat and I will desperately try and keep up with them, or if you would like to unmute yourselves and ask a question, that is also fine. This is the bit that I have to filibust at the beginning while people get their questions together. It's also the bit that I struggle massively with as I try and read everything that comes through all in a flurry in about 5 minutes time. So Nia, I don't know if you want to, you're more than happy to unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like, but I also am aware that people don't necessarily want to talk, so let me know.
Sorry, I can't talk by myself. I thought it would be easier if you collect them. So yes, I can. I'm happy to ask the questions by myself. We are applying participatory grant making, and that's why perhaps I'm interested in some details, and I wasn't sure if I have missed them. For example, I'm very interested in the approach you are running, because I think it's interesting for us as well. I was wondering regarding the peer reviewers, if sorry, I lost myself right now. the way you reach out to the peer reviewers. Are you reaching out to them according to thematic areas? Because you said you are sorting the applications into thematic areas. That's one question. And two short questions after that. I'm interested in the number of concept notes that probably will be forwarded to the Board of Trustees, and about the length of the concept notes, because I assume that it's much easier to have the short concept notes if you're not sure if your application will be accepted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, putting you on the spot.
Should I take that question?
Yeah, go on, go for it.
Okay. All right. So we've had two different peer review processes before. Initially, we ask people to apply, and then we take note of who they are and who their conflict of interest is, who other organizations that they are part of. We take note of that, but then we put the concept notes into different groups according to thematic areas, which would then find who has what background and how it matches with a thematic area. This year is quite different. We've had to reach out to our old peer reviewers that we've worked with. And these are people that we know, and these are people that we've seen doing this. We know who's strong when it comes to the COVID right now in terms of our COVID response grants, or who's strong in terms of movement buildings. And within our program offices, we were able to select from our old peer reviewers and reach out to them to say, the process is going to be quite different this year. We didn't put out a call, but then would want you to come back and do this process. We reached out to 14, and 13 were happy to come back on board, so which is great. In terms of how many concept note might reach the board, I think Sam would have a better idea for that.
It's horrible. It's like 10% usually, sometimes a lot more. We have the 10,000 Rand grant, which is tiny. I'm not even going to put it into pounds, which is very much exploratory. It's very like risky and exploratory. So that ups the grant numbers. So, but about like 9 to 10% are getting recommended to the trustees, and a vast amount of them go through. The reasons they don't go through sometimes are more due diligence, and there's issues with transfers of like there's administration issues that stop that, but literally most of them are going through the board as well, who find a great difficulty to reject a peer-reviewed recommendation. Thanks,
Sam. That was one of the questions that came through, I think, from Bart around kind of what the role of the board is after the peer review. Can they overturn them? I think I spoke to Carla when I was there, and I don't want to get the number wrong, but she said there was only like 3 odd grants that had been rejected at board level. Is that correct, or am I misremembering that? It was a long time ago.
There's no way I'm going to remember that.
It was a really low number. I was quite surprised, and again, like she reiterated, it was predominantly around kind of due diligence, that there was nothing that was overturned based on kind of like
and even like I think one or two of them were one or two of them were combining projects together, so they fell away. But yeah, the idea is that the peer reviewers are in the best position to give the money. The trustees are looking at whether the concept has been translated into the full proposal. That's really the idea behind it, not to overturn the recommendation.
Thanks. The other questions, we've got a few other questions, and a couple of them are quite kind of numbers based. So somebody's asking about how many peer reviewers are kind of previous grant holders. There's also some questions, as ever, we have this question with everything to do with participatory grantmaking. I get this asked loads and loads and loads around remuneration, and whether grant peer reviewers are paid for their time. What does that look like? And then some questions around kind of training for peer reviewers, what that is, and kind of selection of peer reviewers, who selects those. Sorry, that was a lot of questions all in one go. So if you want me to split them up, let me know. But if there's any in there that you want to kind of go for.
So I'll take that. So normally we have a group of 14 to 15 peer reviewers. And most of the time, 70%, I think also Sam could correct that, most of 70% usually are grant holders. So we have to always remove the concept note from their folder, from their thematic area, or they have to be removed out of the room for decisions to be made. But we know who's in the room and what they do and who they're affiliated with. And there's a declaration of conflict of interest that people bring forth initially when we're contracting you as a peer reviewer. And then when you get the concept notes, you go through them and you say, I recognize this one and this one and this one, I work with them. So you're not part of that decision process. How do you get to know how to be a peer reviewer? The first day is pretty much a workshop. So when we are doing the contracting initially, we send you all how do you do the assessment forms, we give you an assessment forms, and they have to tick against that. And when they eventually meet in Joburg, normally we'll fly people in from the region and they stay, we put them in comfortable hotels, and they come and gather at the Other Foundation Center every day for 3 days, usually 2 days. And the first day is half day, so 2.5 days. And the first day is just orientation of what's happening, what exactly were you doing, and our strategy. Obviously, we embed that all the time in every workshop's training for peer reviewers. And from there, they're put into groups where they're able now to debate why they rated this concept proposal higher and all of that. In terms of we don't pay them per se, but we do give out a little stipend just to say for their time and for some costs. But it's a very little amount, and it's not guaranteed as a salary. It's just something to say thank you. Yeah. I think Sam, if you've got any other points I've missed from the question.
So, sorry, Hannah, if I might have missed some of the questions you were asking. I was reading them on the chat. There seems to be a big question about the board's role and the trustees' role. And maybe I do a little to sort of lay that out. So the trustees are made up of different people from different regions, from all over, different sort of interests. Interest is the wrong word as much as sort of focuses, whether it's a trans focus, an intersex focus, a media focus, a religious focus, as well as activists, even grantees from the past, current grantees. The trustees who change. So the founding trustees are starting to put their seats up for new trustees to be allocated. And those trustees, as I said before, aren't really there. They're there for, it is, the final say is with the trustees. There isn't a backwards movement either in the process. So once the peer reviewers leave that space with their recommendations, that is what they recommended, under the full knowledge that some of them might not be funded because of the due diligence process, which we lay out, which we sort of try to be as transparent as possible with what we're doing with our due diligence. And so, but there isn't a backwards even reporting over whether things were funded or not. And the idea there is that what peer reviewers are looking at isn't the nitty gritty, it's looking at the bigger picture. It's looking at the what's going to work, what's not going to work. And so their input and their participation is trying to shape what our portfolios look like. Whereas the trustees come in and shape whether that's a reasonable assumption that this portfolio is going to be successful. They are both from the same group of people, to be completely honest. And so because we're a permanent minority, like Thandeka talked about the conflict of interest, it's hard, and you have to manage it in a really like sort of careful way. You have to manage it in a really diligent way, so that the idea being that everybody trusts the process. And so far we've managed to do that because we're transparent, because we're trying to build a movement, and not just take advantage of a campaign or take advantage of something else. And by doing that, hopefully that trust gets built. In this COVID call, which has stopped us putting a call out for peer reviewers, has allowed us to test that we can call all peer reviewers back, and that the workshop that happens before is just a culmination of lots of workshops that have happened before, the Kapanos, etc., etc. And it's all part of the shift into ownership of the movement, ownership of the campaigns, etc. So the trustees, that's their sort of role, is to play that. We don't want to fund something that's going to fail. We don't want to fund something that's going to be withdrawn because they can't do it. And the full proposal might reveal some of those things. But as we said, the link between them means that very few of them actually are rejected. So yeah, it's difficult to manage. It is difficult to manage. You mustn't think it isn't. But the benefits are that you get a really holistic portfolio that responds to the movement's needs.
And I think the other foundation is a really interesting example because of the way, so there's lots of different ways of doing participatory grant making, and you've got organisations that are set up as participatory grant makers. They are developed from the outset. And the other foundation is one of those. The governance structure and the way that they work was built in from the conception, and therefore the staff, the trustee boards, the grant holders, that there's so much overlap. Most of those people come from the same types of communities, same types of backgrounds, whereas when you've got more traditional funders who are set up in a certain way and are trying to pivot into a participatory approaches, that's when it's quite interesting, because you find that there's a very big distinction between the staff and the people that are being funded. I think it's also important to know that there's loads of different ways of doing participatory grant making, and the other foundation have got their due diligence kind of at the end of that process, whereas there's lots of others that will do that due diligence up front, and then do their decision making with their peers, and it depends at what point that comes in the system. And there are others that don't do due diligence at all. Like, there's such a spectrum in the way that this stuff is done. A lot of that is predominantly related to the organisation that you're in, the governance structure, where the money is coming from, that can contain or change or give you the flexibility and kind of nimbleness to stretch this kind of process and idea and concept as much as possible, or within the parameters that you're working with. So it's quite an interesting way of doing it, and I find it really fascinating because in the organisation that I work with, we do our due diligence up front, but what that means is that everybody who applies for our funding has to do our application form and then a due diligence form of everything that they need to know, and we end up holding a lot of personal data about individuals and organisations. We ask them a lot of questions up front that actually we don't necessarily need to know if they're not going to get through the process. So it's an interesting way of doing it, where you take that onus and that workload off an organisation. They don't need to do that until they've got through the process of, are you being funded, yes or no? So it's just a different way of kind of like top ending or bottom ending that process. Does anybody else have any other questions? The chat's dried up
just
slightly.
add something.
Go on. Yes, Samuel, go.
So it's not that we don't do any due diligence before the peer reviewers sort of see the things. I don't want to use all these jargon words that are, but organic. But the people that know these organizations are peer reviewers. So there is a lot of this organization's full of, I don't know if I can swear, I'm going to swear, full of shit. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, we know these people, they're not doing this. We know these people, they're good, they're doing this. So because we are this, we're sort of everywhere with the peer reviewers, we have that ability to, a form's not going to tell us that. A form's not going to tell us what is actually where this organization is positioned in the community, or where they say they're positioned in the community. So that's sort of our first due diligence, is sort of that the people know each other. We all know, we sort of, because of this ever morphing movement, we want it, and we're getting to know each other more and more and more and more and more. We can call out a lot of those. We can focus on the ones that work. And the fledgling organizations that come, the new organizations, are then supported because they come from this peer review process. People are like, this group has a good idea, let's support them. And that way those partnerships in country also start forming. So I just wanted to add that.
No, that's really helpful. I think it's one of the challenges that I find in my organisation, is when you're getting written applications. I don't know who's trying to bullshit me. Like, I have no idea if somebody's putting on their application form, we work with this community, and actually what they mean is somebody popped in once and used the toilet, and that's them working with the community. Whereas when you use a participatory approach and you know what's going on, and you can often unpick that in a way that you just can't if you're kind of a level removed. Vasilis, you've got questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to, I can read them out, but you can also say them if you'd like.
Sure, yes. Okay. Sorry. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, so I was wondering whether your the peer reviewers become alumni of the organization and keep a relationship with each other and become a community themselves. So if this is something that happens. And another question is quite different in context. Whether you're getting back to your grantees after a period of time to see how they're doing and see how this project that they had done with you affected them.
I'll answer the peer review part, and then Sam could speak about our grant management portfolio. So in terms of the peer reviewers, once you've been a peer reviewer, you've been exposed to so much, your world has changed. You realize the movement is bigger, there's so many opportunities. You can go back home and help your communities write proposals. And also maybe just to unpack what type of peer reviewers we get. We also get grantees who haven't been successful previously, and they're very inquisitive of how the process goes and why is it they've never got funding. So they come with that, I want to see what happens. And usually we have a situation of people going back and having a good understanding, or also maybe I haven't been writing my proposal well, or and also being able to speak on behalf of our process of how transparent it is. But once people have been peer reviewers, they tend to stay within the movement and within our foundation family. And some people end up becoming individual donors. We have a campaign, 1,000,000 where we host dinners and people in people's homes, and people donate after the dinner towards other foundation to support the projects that we're funding. And at times, some people even end up joining the other foundation as employees like myself. And so there's different types of people. I'll give an example of Samuel's mother. Before Sam was part of the other foundation, she was a peer reviewer, and I think she influenced Sam to join the other foundation. So it's just there's different types of people who are interested, and they come with different agendas. So, but there isn't much of a network that we do after that, but they just become part of the other foundation family. We see them next time at our Copano, we see them next time at our events. So the family gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, hustled by my mother to join. So the second question, B, then not sort of like formally, we're not going to go write a report and say this is what we do. We tend to report back differently to usual, to other ways. We have a Facebook following of over, like, I don't know what it is now. I would be mistaken if I gave you a number, but like over 300,000, I think. And that's spread around the region. And we write newsletters on a constant basis, which sort of report back on a lot of what the grantees projects are doing. We have video. We use a lot of our events are video. So the sessions are video, the questions are video. We do interviews with people afterwards that captures a lot of what is being said. So we sort of have we try to report back in a way that's accessible to people. And those peer reviewers are at those events, are at those convenings, are donors themselves. And so being part of the mailing list in and of itself is quite an experience. But the Facebook group really highlights the kinds of change that different groups are doing. And we don't want to have a separate report for peer reviewers. It's part of the same reporting back to the movement, the same accountability to the movement we see as being accountable to the peer reviewers. We say thank you and we give them a nice gift and have a really fun time when people come over. I don't know how this year is going to be though, because I don't think people are going to be able to gather as easily. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Samuel. The last question, Remy has asked, like the biggest question in all of this work is any tips and recommendations on internally changing minds to be more comfortable or open to participatory grant making? That's a really tricky question, Remy, and it's one that we're all grappling with. I think there's a real difference between organisations like the Other Foundation, who are set up as participatory grant making and their trustee boards are well on board, like they were set up in that way, and organisations like the one that I work for, where you're trying to pivot an organisation that's been quite traditional for quite a number of years. And I think those two things are really difficult and different to grapple with. I mentioned it at the beginning of the session, but there is a community of practice of other people that are interested in this space, that are working in this space and working in different ways. So we've got staff from the Other Foundation that are involved in that community of practice, and other participatory grant making organisations like Disability Rights Fund, Mama Cash, Frida, organisations that were set up that. But we also have a lot of foundations and staff in that space who are similar to mine, more traditional organisation trying to pivot. So if anybody is interested in unpicking that question more, we probably can't do that in the next 2 minutes, but I would encourage you to get in touch. I can link you up, network you with people, invite you to conversations and generally kind of unpickings of things. The next session in February should be really lovely because it's a peer support session. So if that's a question that you're grappling with, we can open that up to community and provide a space for you to chat with other people that are having those issues to kind of work out what solutions you might be facing. I am going to close because we are on almost at time, but I'm going to close with an incredible thank you to our speakers. You've been absolutely amazing. It's been so nice to see you guys again. And I'm always a massive promoter of the Other Foundation's work because it was truly a incredible, life-changing opportunity to go and spend time with them on my fellowship. So if you're interested in their work, if you would like to donate, if you're a funder looking in this space to partner with incredible participatory grant makers, particularly in the LGBT sector, because we know that not many people fund in that space, do let me know and I can hook you up with the incredible people at the Other Foundation. And a very quick thank you to Connor for helping me with all the tech stuff and inviting people to the Zoom, because that's just one straw too many for me to cope. It's Thursday, it's nearly Friday, that means it's nearly the weekend. Hopefully you can all have a break. Good luck for anybody who's on a floodplain, and I will see you hopefully at the next session, next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.